Alrighty, well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. On the program, it's our all things Horn of Africa, all things Africa, our Make Me Wanna Holler, all things Black people. We welcome back Abayomi Azikiwe, the editor of Pan-African Newswire. He's a frequent contributor to Black Agenda Reports and other Pan-Africanist publications, anti-imperialist publications. He's often a sought-out voice for CGTN, Press TV, Global Research .ca, and Newshour, and countless other left-leaning and anti-imperialist media. He's an independent journalist, historian, and activist. And yes, on the program, we return to the Horn of Africa. We're going to be talking about Somaliland. So let's get into it. First of all, Abayomi, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for the invitation.
Always an honor to have you on. So, all right. So, I actually did not get the chance to research too much into Somaliland, but there was a recent interview Ann Garrison of Black Agenda Reports did with a Kenyan Somali person from Somalia, and I thought it was a very interesting interview. So, so Somaliland first. Tell us Somaliland's connections to Somalia, and my only follow up question, for this is internationally, is Somaliland a recognized country across Africa and much of the international community? And if the answer is no, why is that the case?
I think that the reason why it is not recognized is because it's a breakaway area of central Somalia. And of course, Somalia is attempting to consolidate the entire country under the centralized federal governmental system. You have Puntland, which is another breakaway area. Jubaland is not as concentrated in terms of their breakaway, but Somaliland, of course, was former British Somaliland. And of course, the Somalian people were broken up into at least 5 different nation states by the early 1960s. They were the Italians, you had the British, the French. There's also Somalians in Ethiopia as well as Kenya. So there are people who advocate.
Talk about a real scramble for Africa. So even just one country, it can be divided between all of these colonial gangsters.
Yes, because the imperialists didn't care. They were only after their own interests, and things shifted. You had two imperialist wars, one between 1914 and 1918, the other between 1939 and 1945. So there was reconfigurations of colonial rule in the aftermath of both of those wars. We saw what happened, for example, in Southwest Africa, which is today Namibia. It had been colonized initially by Germany, who carried out a genocide there between 1904 and 1907. Then after the First Imperialist War, it was ceded to the Republic. Well, it wasn't the Republic, it was the Union of South Africa at the time. And they ran the country up until 1990. So this was happening all over the continent. But Somaliland has about 6 million people. And they have been seeking recognition as an independent state since 1991, during the period in which the former government of Siad Barre collapsed. The country disintegrated into a factional civil war, and this has lasted for many, many years. They were able to put together a central government during the early 2000s to, try to put the country back together again.
And that was the Islamic Union, right?
Okay, yes, that was very important phase in Somalian history. You had the Islamic Courts Union, which was doing a lot of great work, particularly in the capital and other parts of the country, building national unity, trying to rebuild national unity in Somalia. And of course, this was a threat to US imperialism. They targeted the Islamic Courts Union. They were, feeding people, stabilizing neighborhoods. You can't have that when there are interests of imperialism that are more concerned about exploitation than they are about stability. at least stability on the terms of the people, in terms of the people's well-being. So they encouraged, for example, the government in Ethiopia at the time, this was in 2006, under Meles Zenawi, the TPLF and the EPRDF-led government in Ethiopia intervened militarily into Somalia, ostensibly to stabilize the country, but it was a move that was done on behalf of U.S. imperialism.
Yeah.
This was back in 2006 under the administration of George W. Bush Jr. So then, of course, fighting erupted. Then the airstrikes began around 2007 by the United States. You also had the intervention of Kenya as well during that time period. Now, the intervention of Somalia and Kenya led to the formation of the African Union Mission in Somalia, AMISOM, which was formed around 2007, 2008. That was funded by the US and later by the United Nations as well, and the European Union. So this has been going on for decades. Somaliland right now wants recognition. There have been numerous articles that have been published in the last few weeks that they're making a bid to the Trump administration to recognize them as an independent nation state. I think it's a mistake. It's opportunistic to think that this leader of the United States is going to have any position or any policy that distinguishes itself from previous administrations. So that is a major issue right now in the international press, that they are making a bid for recognition by the United States under the Trump administration, which celebrated its 1 month anniversary yesterday. It's been a whirlwind.
Feels like it's already been 5 years with the Trump administration in power.
Yeah, they're just creating chaos all over the place. They're intensifying hostilities, even among the imperialists themselves. We see what's happening between the US and Canada, Denmark, you name it. The European Union is quite upset with the posture of the Trump administration. So I don't think the people in Somaliland should be excited or pleased that this is supposedly being considered by the Trump administration, because if he does recognize Somaliland as an independent state, doesn't mean that the African Union will recognize it, and it does not mean that the other regional organizations in Africa will recognize it, or the United Nations, for that much. And what is the real reason behind it? They do have a port at Hargeisa, and that could be an idea of the Trump administration to set up some type of military base in that area. And that would, of course, be dangerous, not only for people in Africa, but also for people in West Asia. So this has been a major topic that's been written about. They have a new president in the country who took over just in December. They've had like 6 different administrations. They do have elections, multi-party elections, and all the reports that we receive indicate that the country is much more stable than the centrally recognized Somalian government and territory.
Interesting. That's interesting. Any reason as to why that is actually?
They're claiming that they have a better security apparatus than the government in Mogadishu, but who knows? There could be other factors involved in regard to the level of stability in Somaliland, in Hargeisa, as opposed to Somalia itself, around Mogadishu and other areas. But it doesn't mean it's going to remain that way, particularly if the United States gets involved in that area, because it's going to attract a lot of hostility, and it could also cause a lot of confusion for the people in Somaliland. So that is a major issue right now, and that's something that the African Union should be concerned about, as well as the entire international community.
So let me ask you this question, which is the people of Somaliland. What makes them distinct from the rest of Somalia? Is it ethnicity? Is it language? Is it religion? Is it all of the above? Or is this one of those? One of my questions here was, what does Western imperialism play in the rift that has developed between Somaliland and Somalia,
Yes.
Somalia. So, is there something about the about the people of Somaliland that makes them distinct from Somalia, or is it one of those things where there's not that much difference in the ethnicity, in the culture, even in the language, and this is just some Western imperialism uh, exploiting legitimate grievances and then supporting the most reactionary movements and the new kind of ethno nationalism which Western imperialism is a champion of doing. I'm curious your response.
Yes. Well, as I mentioned, you had different colonial powers that were in charge of different aspects of the Somalian diaspora, for use of a better term. So that could have a lot to do with it. And also, it's a smaller population in that area. So that could have a lot to do with it. And as you mentioned, the role of the United States and other imperialist countries that appear to be encouraging them to act independently of the government, but at the same time to make the breakaway permanent. Because if they're recognized as another state in Africa, that would be problematic because then you would have 56 states that would be a part of the African Union framework. There's 55 now, with one, of course, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, which is led by the Polisario Front, that is still under occupation by the Kingdom of Morocco. They have a seat at the table at the AU, and they also have observer status at the United Nations, but they do not have sovereignty and independence because the Kingdom of Morocco has upheld the multi-party elections that the UN mandated over 3 decades ago. And they had a ceasefire there for many years, and of course, that's been lifted. So the same situation could develop in Somaliland. If the central government opposes the annexation, formal annexation of Somaliland, there's definitely going to be resistance against that state and possibly even greater resistance against the United States. So these are some of the problems that are going on. And also, there was a disagreement between Somalia and Ethiopia because Ethiopia, being a landlocked country, they wanted to utilize Somaliland's port to make a separate agreement with them. And that would be somewhat of a de facto recognition by the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. So it's a potential for even greater conflict in the Horn of Africa.
And well, so you've already answered, the question on what role does Ethiopia and its endless love-hate relationship with the West play in Somaliland affairs. How about Eritrea? Is Eritrea an innocent actor in what goes on in Somaliland? Are they neutral when it comes to the conflicts between Somaliland and Somalia? Yeah, I'm curious your response.
Yeah, I think the Eritrean government, the state of Eritrea, recognizes the central government in Somalia. They have provided some assistance to them in terms of trying to stabilize the country. But in terms of their position on recognizing Somaliland, I don't think it would be in their interests at this stage to recognize them as a distinct entity from the government in Mogadishu. So this is why the U.S. decision is so critical at this point, because we know the efforts of Donald Trump in causing confusion, division, and thinking that by creating division and confusion that he could enhance the imperialist power of the United States,
Yeah.
demanding, for example, access to rare metals in Ukraine, or claiming that the United States needs Greenland, whose population, majority of which is our indigenous people. So yeah, I think this has a lot to do with it, that if they could use Somaliland as a military and economic outpost for the United States in that region, that is the only reason why they would recognize it. They're not going to recognize it simply on the basis of the aspirations of the leadership in Somaliland.
Interesting. Now, what needs to happen to bring peace and reconciliation between Somaliland and Somalia? And is there anything Somalia and honest actors, which I know are largely non-existent in African affairs, but if one was to bring this issue to one of the BRICS countries or to the group of nations collectively and other honest actors, what would need to happen to bring peace and goodwill between Somaliland and Somalia, and what should uh, BRICS, either collectively or even individually, China and Russia, South Africa, or even Brazil. What do you think they can do to try to bring peace between them and Somaliland? Just be a part of Somalia with yeah. Curious your response.
It would take intense dialogue. It would take negotiations. They need to stabilize the situation more in Somalia proper. Although they've made some advancements against Al-Shabab and the Islamic State, it's still fighting and disagreement inside the country. And the question is, who's really behind all of this? We saw just in recent weeks that the Trump administration has carried out aerial bombardments in Somalia under the guise of fighting terrorism or fighting the Islamic State. So I think that has a lot to do with
which you and other anti-imperialists and even folks in Somaliland say Islamic State does not exist in Somaliland. There's movements that are part of the Islamic courts. There is Al-Shabab, but actually, in fact, even explain to people how the Islamic Courts Union is not the same as, say Boko Haram. Al-Shabaab is not the same as the Islamic Union and ISIS, which was exported into North Africa following the criminal overthrow of Gaddafi. And that's actually why we do have, these Wahhabist, Salafist, right-wing death squads, which were exported into the continent from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the West, Israel, and so forth.
Yeah, it's a complicated development. The Islamic courts unions, of course, did a lot to rebuild a unified society in Somalia. However, during the resistance against the intervention of Ethiopia and Kenya and AMISOM as a whole, which the U.S. was behind, there was a split within the Islamic Court Union. Some decided to join a reconfigured, centralized federal government, but the youth of that group, Al-Shabab, which broke off and started waging their own struggle against the AU and other US-backed forces. That's how the split took place. And then as years progressed, there was a split between Al-Shabab and the Islamic State of Somalia. The group which broke away did not want to be affiliated with Al-Qaeda. And Al-Shabab itself, eventually the leadership that was able to consolidate its authority inside the country, affiliated with Al-Qaeda. So it became a very complicated process. And a lot of people started to question the character of their movement as a resistance force when they allied themselves with Al-Qaeda. And later when the split occurred, and you had two different factions, one allied with Al-Qaeda and the other allied with the Islamic State. So at this point, the federal government is attempting to fight these different forces. Sheikh Mohammed, who is the president of Somalia right now, wants, for example, more US military involvement. I mean, this is a contradiction. The president of Somalia actually praised
given all of what the U.S. has done to Somalia, including backing its arch nemesis Ethiopia, that's very surprising that a Somali president of any part of the political spectrum would think that the U.S. can be an honest actor in conflicts within Somalia and Somaliland.
Yes. So you have the people in Somaliland, many of them, along with the new president, who is Abdi Kadar Mohammed Abdullahi, that's the name of the new leader there, who came to power, I believe, in November or December, looking to the United States for some type of official recognition. And then you have the central government in Mogadishu actually welcoming U.S. airstrikes on their own territory. So these are the contradictions that are going on, but it won't solve the problem of the lack of unity and the ongoing fighting and underdevelopment in Somalia. They need to put the U.S. and the other imperialist countries out of the room and sit down among themselves to have an actual conversation to rebuild trust and to rebuild territorial integrity and unity in Somalia as a whole. That's what really needs to be done to resolve the conflict. And the African Union should take a more active role. They have been playing a key role in the stabilization force, the transitional force, and the peacekeeping forces, but they're ready to leave. Many of the countries want out. I mean, this has been going on since 2007, 2008. We're talking about 17, 18 years. So a lot of them are tired of this and they want out, but they don't feel they can leave at this point unless there's more stability and more unity inside the country.
Fascinating. And I'm gonna actually switch my questions. So why do you think that the African Union isn't taking a more aggressive diplomatic role in trying to bring peace and reconciliation between Somaliland and Somalia?
They could be overwhelmed. The situation involving the deployment of troops from certain countries, like Uganda has committed a lot of troops into Somalia. So has Ethiopia, and some other countries have. So that is their major preoccupation. However, in terms of their willingness to initiate a diplomatic assault on a division, it could be beyond their scope at this particular time to do something like that effectively. First, they want to stabilize the situation in Somalia, and then, of course, they can move on to initiate more serious and more importantly, significant talks about reunification of Puntland, Somaliland, Somalia itself, and also the problems in the south in Jubaland. So all this is going to require dialogue. It's going to require negotiations, and that's going to take a long-term process to resolve. This has been going on since 1991. We're talking about 34 years that this has been going on. And even before that, there were problems, regional problems inside the country, the problems with the former government of Mohammed Siad Barre, which collapsed in 1991. He shifted from being allied with the former Soviet Union to being allied with the United States. And it did not save his government. And it brought about the total collapse of the government in the early 1990s. Then we had the intervention of the UN and later the United States in 1992 and 93. They were forced to leave because the resistance forces in Somalia fought both the US and the UN during 1993. So they had to leave the country.
And that was the story of Black Hawk Down, and an important and in fact something which is very, very important because there's so much propaganda about Black Hawk Down that the U.S. And later Canadian peacekeeping forces were these white knights in shining armor or blue helmets or green helmets, but really they actually were committing lots of war crimes. Hence why when the helicopters came, the Somali resistance forces shot it down. And okay, yes, they were very, very brutal with the soldiers and so forth, but that was just giving America and Canada a taste of its own medicine because of all the systemic war crimes they had been inflicting on Somalia, correct?
Yes. In fact, several months earlier, they had bombed a headquarters, what was actually a meeting hall of a lot of Somalian elders who were meeting. This was during the summer months here of 1993. and they killed a lot of Somalians, well-respected people inside the country. And after that, all bets were off. It was just open warfare between the U.S. and the Somalian National Alliance, which was known at that particular time, and headed by a guy by the name of Muhammad Farah Adi. And he's since passed away. But that was a real serious effort to destroy U.S. imperialist involvement in Somalia. And they did leave, but they did not ignore developments inside Somalia. So we're talking about a decade, maybe 13 years later, the U.S. re-intervened through Ethiopia as a proxy military force to uphold its interests, and also through Kenya at the same time. So they're not going to give it up. That area is located right on the Indian Ocean, the Gulf of Aden. Also, it is prospects for oil exploration and drilling is there, which has been discussed for decades and decades. But the full exploitation of the oil and petroleum resources in Somalia have still not been realized because of the instability in the country. And also, it could be they're not quite ready at this time to build the necessary infrastructural apparatus to extract the oil, extract the petroleum resources. So they want a more compliant government, a government that they are more in control of before they move in fully to exploit the resources of Somalia. I think that the whole problem with the Horn of Africa, of course, is its strategic location, the resources that exist there, and the imperialists are very good at dividing people and bringing about chaos and confusion. And this is what they've done in Africa historically, and it's still going on in the Horn of Africa as well.
And now, China was able, I don't know how long it's going to last, but China was able to sort of bring peace / détente between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which we still have yet to see if that means that there is going to be more stability in West Asia and much more unity when it comes to bringing Israel to account for its epic crimes against humanity, not only towards the indigenous Palestinians. We know that sometimes Russia can intervene on the right side of history, like what they did with Syria. So, do you think there's a chance if the right, if the right honest actors, brought the situation that Somalia is having with Somaliland, do you think that BRICS could either individually or collectively bring peace between Somaliland and Somalia?
I think they could play an important role, as you mentioned, bringing about some form of détente between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Islamic Republic of Iran. That was very important as far as the resistance is concerned, particularly over the last year and a half with the situation in Gaza as well, the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem, the fact that there's more unity in the positions of Iran and Saudi Arabia. And they have, of course, opposed, even the Saudis are opposing the latest U.S. imperialist plan for Gaza to take over the Gaza Strip and to run it as a military and economic outpost of the United States. That proposal has gone nowhere, even among the staunchest allies of U.S. imperialism, whether it's Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Egypt. They've all rejected this proposal by Trump. So it's really, really an amazing situation that the resistance has prompted this type of unity and also a rejection of the latest outrageous proposal by the Trump administration to relocate the Palestinians again to Egypt and Jordan and other places, and possibly even to Somaliland, and then have it as a a money-making proposition for the Trump family and their allies. So it's a bad, bad proposal. It has been rejected. The Palestinian people will not accept that. Neither will people throughout the region, because you have to understand that if they forcibly relocate Palestinians, for example, to Jordan or to Egypt, then they're just not going to sit there. They're going to organize resistance to fight back to return to their homeland. This is going to drag Jordan and Egypt deeper into the Palestinian question. So I don't see that happening in the short term.
Where ends and actually, just out of curiosity, if Western-backed Tigrayan secessionist forces were to stop their hostilities towards Ethiopia, and the detente and goodwill between the current Ethiopian government and Eritrea and Somalia is allowed to blossom without any Western imperial sabotage, do you think then that all will be well with Somaliland and its relations with Somalia, as well as its neighbors in the Horn of Africa and possibly the rest of the continent?
It could improve relations. I don't think it'll be fully resolved until the breakaway areas are brought back into the centralized fold of Somalia. I don't think it's any solution in the type of, for use of a better term, balkanization of Somalia. I don't see that as being a solution to the crisis. It hasn't worked in other states, for example, Sudan. You know, support for the breakaway of the Republic of South Sudan, yet there's still problems inside Sudan itself. There was even a civil war 2 years after they were recognized as an independent state between the two major factions of the Sudanese People's Liberation Movement. So that has been somewhat resolved, but there has not been a federated effort to reunite Sudan as a whole. They were the largest nation state in Africa prior to the partition. And there's also other efforts to break the country up even further. We see with the civil war that's been going on now for nearly 2 years, the problems with the RSF and the Sudanese armed forces. So it's even more factionalism and balkanization in that area. And Sudan, of course, is part of the, particularly the eastern part, is part of the Horn of Africa. The Sudanese Port Sudan and other areas are part of that whole geopolitical construct.
And is that why you, as a Pan-Africanist leftist and one of the best anti-imperialist thinkers, especially when it comes to the continent of Africa, is that why you think Somaliland and all other Pan-Africanist leftists and anti-imperialists, our approach to Somaliland should be them, reconciling with Somalia, as opposed to just being its own new country?
Yeah, I think the reformation of a centralized Somalian state is the beginning of the solution. I don't see any solution in further division of the country. As we've seen in the last few decades, in terms of Europe itself, they've been acting more on a consolidated basis. And now they may have to reactivate that even further because of Trump's alienation of the European Union and the UK. So we'll see what happens because Zelensky of Ukraine was calling for the formation of a European Continental Army.
Yes, in
defend
fact, Macron was also a big advocate of a European army. To which I say, well, what's NATO? But that's but yes,
it would be West. It would be the UK. It would be Western Europe and Eastern Europe outside of the Russian Federation. I'm sure people in other states like Poland, for example, possibly Hungary, maybe not under the Orban government, but maybe future government, I guess, would be part of this European Continental Army that would fight Russia and ignore the United States to the extent that they can, So that would be really an interesting construct. But it's so much division that's going on right now in the Horn of Africa that has to be resolved. Until that's resolved, it's going to put a major brake on any development projects that exist in that region. We know that in Ethiopia itself, there are problems between the TPLF and the OLF in the south. There are problems between the Amhara groups and their militias and the central government of President Abiy Ahmed. So all these things have to be resolved before there's any real serious development, I mean, genuine and qualitative development in the Horn of Africa, which has tremendous resources. Its position in regard to the Indian Ocean, the Gulf of Aden, the Red Sea, the Straits of Hormuz, also the petroleum resources that exist there and other strategic metals and minerals that exist in the Horn of Africa. So the region has tremendous potential, but at the same time, as long as the imperialists are able to come in and divide people, it's not going to materialize. Just like what they've targeted Somaliland, for example, right now, for destabilization of Somalia. But it's only being done on the basis of the interests of the United States. And this is what the new president of Somaliland has to understand, because it's not going to help his people, even if Trump does recognize them as an independent state, because it's going to cause even more division between the central government and possibly other entities inside of the Horn of Africa.
And history has shown, history has shown,
yes,
history has shown you can never ever trust the U.S. and the collective West, whether it's Canada, France, Germany, Britain, Australia, and so forth, because you can be their most loyal ally, you can do their bidding, you can set another country on fire, you can send your police to be state terrorists in a place like Haiti. At the end of the day, the West, the moment they find the moment you even push back a little bit against it, or you have a disagreement with them, the West will, betray you and so forth, or even find folks within your country that they can exploit to, as you mentioned, balkanize and further divide and conquer, because the West loves and gets off from having an unstable Africa. The thing they fear the most is a stable Africa where all of Central Africa is getting along with each other, the Horn of Africa is getting along with each other, the South of Africa is getting along with each other, and of course, Pan-Africanism, just that ideology alone, whether it's from the left or the right, but specifically if it's a left project, yeah, that scares, global white supremacy.
Yeah, I think the Pan-Africanism that would be the most effective would be from the left, because I think that socialist construction or reconstruction of Africa is the only real solution to the developmental issue. In order to compete against the imperialist countries, there has to be greater unity, and that unity has to be based upon the interests of the majority of the people in those societies, and that is the working people, the farmers, and the youth, the revolutionary youth, and cultural workers, intellectuals, and so forth. They would have to constitute the backbone of any socialist project which is continental, and that is what's going to take to actually bring genuine development to the African continent. Now, if you look at the African Union Charter, they just had a meeting last weekend where they discussed a number of issues, but one major issue they discussed was reparations for African enslavement and European colonialism. And that was immediately rejected by all of the imperialist countries. And it's good that they're putting this forward as a programmatic demand to let the West know that Africa is conscious that its underdevelopment is largely rooted, as Walter Rodney and Eric Williams and so many others, Kwame Du Bois and all of them said, was rooted in the European imperialist system. So if they can convince people that that is the case, then of course that puts them on a course of battling US and world imperialism as a whole. And that's what has to happen. Just to give reparations, it's going to require a struggle anti-imperialist struggle by the African people against the U.S. and the European Union. It's not going to be done voluntarily because they are in an economic crisis themselves. That's what's underlining this whole struggle that's going on now worldwide, whether it's the U.S. versus China, whether it's the U.S. versus Russia, whether it's the U.S. versus the Islamic Republic of Iran, and other BRICS. The BRICS countries, they've threatened all of them to carry out sanctions and possible military action if their actions redirect attention away from the United States and bring about some type of revolutionary movement on the continent. So, and throughout the world. So they're committed to maintaining U.S. hegemony and even enhancing it. You know, anytime Donald Trump can threaten to annex Canada, as large as it is, as the 51st state of the U.S., which has brought about so much hostility on the part of the Canadian government and people. This country is supposed to be the closest ally of the United States, and yet the hostility level is almost unprecedented. I mean, booing the national anthem at sporting events, taking U.S.-made products off the shelves in Canada. All of this is taking place under the Trump administration, and he's doing the same thing in regard to the European Union and the UK. It may even force them back together in order to try to deal with the situation that Trump has created.
I wish that well, I mean, you know, this is where the left this is where the left in the West could really exploit the situation because because unfortunately the EU is still the EU and NATO members like Australia and New Zealand are all overwhelmingly very hostile towards Russia, very hostile towards China, very hostile towards the BRICS. So a European army would be very reactionary. And unfortunately, Canada, instead of thinking to themselves, well, we could get oil from Venezuela and we can stop our hostilities towards Venezuela. We should stop our hostilities towards China and actually have a reset and go back to just a détente with them and so forth. No, in fact, they're doubling down on very reactionary politics. So we could see a world pre-World War I where you have the U.S. at least under this Trump administration, but who knows what kind of far right Republican comes after Trump, or you have. So we could see ourselves in a pre-World War II, a pre-World War I scenario where you have rival inter-imperial rivalries. But that is where you could, but that is where Africa, Latin America, much of Asia and West Asia could really, really, well, hopefully we could see a renaissance of Pan-Arabism, Pan-Middle Easternism, Pan-Africanism, but of course from from a radical left perspective, right?
Yeah, the League of Arab States are having a meeting this weekend to discuss, in part, this proposal by Donald Trump for the removal of 2.3 Palestinians. They're settling in Jordan and Egypt and possibly even in Somaliland, to denounce that and to say that they do not support it as a collective regional body. And that's very, very important for them to have a unified stance on this question, because Trump at the same time is saying that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has agreed to invest billions and billions of dollars in the United States. But at the same time, he wants to dictate what their foreign policy is. He wants to make sure that they recognize the state of Israel as a legitimate entity. And they're not willing to do that unless the Palestinian state is created. This is what they've said officially. So this is very, very important to see that Trump is going to have a very difficult time in advancing his hegemonic biddings or desires in light of how it conflicts with that of the UK and the European Union and other NATO countries. So they're making even a larger bid at this time for greater US hegemony. to further suppress the economic and military status of the European Union and the UK, and at the same time to enhance the US control over world resources. Like he said in regard to Greenland, that the United States needs that territory for its economic potential. They need Canada to enhance the US's military posture and economic posture around the world. But this is only going to create more hostilities. This is the contradiction. So as you mentioned, the pre-World War I period, there are many similarities that I see right now in regard to the posture of the Trump administration and his conflicts with the European Union along with China. And many people say, well, he's trying to end the war in Ukraine. To the extent that that's true, it's for the wrong reasons. They only want to end the war there.
Exactly. Exactly.
So they can put more attention on China and also on Iran to try to weaken China and possibly overthrow the Islamic Republic of Iran. That is what's underlying this whole bid to end the Ukraine war, which could very well not be successful. It may not be successful because the Russian Federation will have to accept the terms set down by Donald Trump, and they may not be willing to do that. He claimed while he was running for office that he would end the war in 24 hours. Well, it's been over a month now, and they're just involved in talks about talks, but there's no real negotiations in terms of disengagement, a ceasefire, and also a reconfiguration of the political situation between the Russian Federation, the Donbass, and also the Ukrainian government that's based in Kiev. So it's a lot of work.
Exactly.
Done.
And
no guarantee that Trump is going to be successful in any of this. You know, even some people on the supposed left have been saying, well, Trump will end the war in Ukraine, a war that was started by Biden and earlier, actually by Obama back in 2014. But as I mentioned, whether that's going to happen still remains to be seen. And even if it does happen on a temporary basis, it's for the wrong reasons.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's for the wrong reasons.
Exactly.
It's aimed at neutralizing the situation.
The far right movement of Trump. They're not anti-imperialist and they're not anti-war. They're selectively anti-war. And what they would like is détente with Russia, because for them, they view Russia as this far right paradise that we should be kindred spirits of. They hate fags, we hate fags, so they actually should be on our side, and we should get Russia to be part of the West, so that and have them join us for a war on China. And I just don't see Russia, even with its fiscal conservatism, I just don't see Russia breaking off its pattern of not just being anti-imperialist, but respecting every country and every region's sovereignty, and demanding that the West respects their sovereignty and their sphere of influence. I just don't see Russia flipping and then being part of the West club because they think it would be great to keep China in line and keep China on a leash. Your final.
No, I don't see that happening either. No, I don't see that happening either. Russia and China have been coming together closer and closer over the last few decades. The Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa Plus Summit is a clear indication of that. They're working towards de-dollarization, and that's why Trump has targeted them as well. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say we want some partnership with the Russian Federation, but at the same time, you're imposing sanctions against the BRICS countries. It's just too much of a contradiction.
Exactly.
And plus, the U.S. is outnumbered. If you look at all those countries that are involved in the BRICS grouping right now, it's approaching half of the world's population. And they have tremendous amounts of resources there. And more people want to join BRICS. They're lining up to join this formation. So they got a lot on their hands to try to, first of all, in the war in Ukraine within the interests of the United States. And what's amazing is that Trump said that the Ukrainians would have to turn over their rare metals, access to their rare metals, as a repayment for the military and other assistance that the U.S. has supplied to Ukraine since
Like, we lost
2014.
the war, but we lost the war. We flooded your country with our weapons, but we didn't put any troops. You lost the war. Now you've lost a part of your country, but you have to pay us with your minerals. Even though Zelensky went on the privatization killing spree the moment he, declared a state of emergency and suppressed all political opposition from the left
Right.
to the right, from the fringe left to the far right. I mean, it's
And
anyways, why people still trust the United States is beyond me. Why people still want? Why? I mean, I know why. Even some Ukrainians say that they still want to be aligned with the West and be part of the EU and NATO is beyond me, because I think they've shown that they only see you as pawns on the chessboard, and but anywho.
Yeah, I mean, they can even try to overthrow. They could even try to overthrow the Zelensky government and put in somebody who's more pliant in regard to the Trump administration's aims and objectives in Ukraine. But whether they can get people in Ukraine to go along with such a scenario at this point is highly, highly questionable whether they can do that. I think Zelensky, who is their puppet, still represents class forces in Ukraine who want independence, who want to merge with NATO, who want a closer relationship with the European Union and the United States. And that's the problem that the Trump administration has. And that's going to continue because after a month, they have not been able to bring about a ceasefire in Ukraine. And now they're talking about moving forward in some type of negotiated situation. But it's really no guarantee that it will be successful. And at the same time, it could even cause greater problems within the European Union and the UK vis-a-vis their relationship with the United States.
Western imperialism, nothing but chaos and disasters.
Right.
Well, we were joined on this edition of 1+1. I think it's a perfect place to end. So we were joined on this edition of 1+1, our All Things Horn of Africa, All Things Africa edition, our Make Me Wanna Holler, which is all things Black people across Turtle Island to Britain and the world, all things Somaliland, with Abayomi Azikiwe, the editor of Pan-African Newswire, also a frequent contributor to Black Agenda Reports, and again, often a sought-out voice for CGTN, Press TV, Global Research, and countless other left-leaning anti-imperialist media. Again, he's an independent journalist, historian, and an activist, yes, and so Abiyome, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. We're almost done with the Horn of Africa, so the next country, folks, tune in. The next country we're going to be talking about is Djibouti, and then after that, we're going to be talking about the middle of Africa, all the Central African countries. So join us until then.
Yes,
And
Djibouti, formerly French Somaliland. Yeah,
exactly.
Formerly French Somaliland. Yes.
So happy Black History Month, folks, and Abiyome, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you.